Welcome to the Thursday edition of the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers in search of creative teaching strategies. Whether you're new around here or you've been listening since the beginning, I'm really glad you're here for today's edition of Highly Recommended. This week, I'm sharing about one of my favorite authors of all time, Jason Reynolds, and the amazing array of books he has waiting for you and your students. Okay, so let's start with a little bit of background about Jason Reynolds. A few years ago, he was named the YA ambassador for the Library of Congress, and he did such an astounding job in that role. He was seemingly everywhere. I've seen him in so many interviews. He's done so many read-alouds and special events, and he really embodied that role of like an ambassador for YA and making the genre more accessible, helping more kids get interested in it. His website has the tagline, "Here's what I do, not write boring books." And you can really feel that what he does for kids, right? I mean, he writes the kind of books that he thinks he would have wanted to read as a kid and that his friends would have wanted to read. And having recommended them to teachers for a long time, read tons of them myself and read 2 of them out loud to my own son, I just cannot say enough. I cannot say enough about the amazing author that is Jason Reynolds. And if you haven't read his books, or maybe if you've only read one, the point of today's episode is to give you an idea of the range of what he has out there. So maybe you can go a little further and you can help your students to go a little further. Because if you've just read one Jason Reynolds book and thought to yourself, wow, that was a great book, you were just at the tip of the awesomeness iceberg. So let's run through his books real quick, starting with books that are for younger kids. So one that I read to my son this year is Stunt Boy in the Meantime. And this is kind of like a graphic novel / comic book about a young boy and the adventures he has with his best friend in his apartment building, and also their kind of nefarious evildoer enemy, this other boy that lives in their apartment building. And he's just like, he's a great kid. He's dealing with his parents starting to split up, and they're always saying something to him like, in the meantime, you go do this. And it's this great play on this idea of in the meantime, that the book title is actually Stunt Boy in the Meantime, his experience in the meantime. While his parents are going through all this stuff, what's going on with him and his friend and this other boy that is always bothering them? It's a really funny book. It's a good read, and it's a quick read, right? I mean, my 11-year-old and I really enjoyed it. Another book that I really enjoyed with my son, so again, we're talking about like upper elementary, lower middle school, is Jason Reynolds' book, As Brave as You. And the thing really that stands out to most to me as I remember this book is not the overall plot, although that was certainly striking, but it was the way the narrator sort of kept this diary of questions that he had about life. I feel like that was the hook for my son. Listening to this young boy talk about what he was curious about and sort of list all these crazy, funny, interesting questions. Looking back, that's what I remember the most, although the content got much deeper going into the book. Okay, so those are for the youngest readers, I think. Although As Brave as You does get into the fact that the narrator's grandfather is going to teach him how to shoot a gun, and he doesn't really want to learn to shoot a gun. So you have to kind of decide about the kids that you're working with, whether having a gun in the book is acceptable or not. Really, the boy doesn't, in the end, really want to learn to shoot a gun, and it's very much about him realizing that and what that means for his relationship with his grandfather, and kind of explaining that to his grandfather and explaining that he could still be brave. And I don't know, there's a lot of depth to it. And I was perfectly comfortable reading it with my 11-year-old. Okay, next let's talk about the track series. The track series really honestly blew me away. It starts with the book Ghost, and it's about this boy, Castle Crenshaw, who's had a really terrible experience. His father tried to kill him and his mother one day when he came home, and he and his mother fled, and the whole book is after that, but he does remember that moment. And obviously it has had an effect on him. It has had a big effect on him and on his mother, but he's past the actual event, and he's just living his life, going to school, dealing with bullies, figuring out, what makes him happy. And he's walking by a track one day, and he sort of gets into like a competition with some of the kids that are on it. He wants to show that he's just as fast as them. And it turns out that he is super fast. And he ends up on this track team. And the book is like the story of him adjusting to the idea of being on a sports team, learning what he learns, making friends with who he makes friends with. And then it unfolds into a series where 3 of the other kids on the track team, who have equally interesting, complicated, fascinating stories for students to read, also have their moment in the sun, have their story. So the first book is Ghost. There's also Lou, Sunny, and Patina. And it's hard for me to believe that I can say this, but the truth is they're all equally good. And so if you can hook a student on one of them, then they have 3 more awesome, similarly lengthed, similarly themed books that they can enjoy. Okay. Coming up a little bit older now, there's Long Way Down. This book is one of those kind of sure things. I don't say that about many books. I think The Outsiders is another one. Long Way Down seems to hit for almost every group of students. It is a very compelling book. There's a graphic novel version and a regular text version, although the regular text is a novel in verse. And so they're both fast reads, extremely accessible, extremely compelling. The main character has just lost his brother. His brother has been shot, and he feels, based on sort of the rules of his neighborhood, that his job is to go and shoot the person who shot his brother. But it's obviously incredibly painful for him. He does not feel at all prepared. He just knows that those are the rules. And the whole book is the story of him going down the elevator from his top floor down to, getting out into the world with a gun, on him. And so at each level of the apartment building, a ghost gets on with him, somebody that he's lost in his life to gun violence. And he has a conversation with that person. And it's incredibly powerful, striking, complex, everything that you would expect. But it's also delivered in like a short, compelling, just really engaging way for students. And so, for 9th grade or 10th grade, I think Long Way Down is a fantastic option for a whole class text, fantastic option for book clubs, absolute for choice reading. You can't go wrong. You can't go wrong sharing this book with your students. It's so good. All right, next I would talk about Stamped. I listened to the audiobook of this. This was a collaboration between Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi, and it's like a history of racism. How did racism come to be? What's the history of it? How did this even happen, that anybody thought that one color was better than another color, or that one color should have more power over another color? And it's very, obviously well researched, full of information, and it's beautifully read by Jason Reynolds. I would really recommend the audiobook. And I feel like the nonfiction element is something that you can bring into other units. You can play just like a little bit of the book to complement something that you're discussing in class and explain a concept. But it would be a great listen over the summer as a teacher, just to have the context and then to see what pieces of it you might want to use in class. Okay, then there's Jason Reynolds' book, Ain't Burned All the Bright. This was a collaboration with his friend Jason Griffith, who's an artist, and it's really unusual. They wrote it during the pandemic and during the George Floyd demonstrations and upheaval in the United States, and it's about a boy who's just like in his apartment watching what's going on around him. His grandfather has COVID and he's stuck in the back bedroom. Everything on TV is about the demonstrations and about what happened to George Floyd, and he's kind of seeing his family react to that and also be like taking care of his grandfather. And it's understandably pretty overwhelming for this boy as he's sort of taking this all in and trying to figure out his world. But then there's this beautiful transition in the late middle that sort of shows, okay, his grandfather is going to get better. Okay, society is going to get better. It's not like a quick fix. You're not just suddenly like, oh, happily ever after, everything's fine. But although it wades through like these really big, important, difficult topics, it comes out with this really lovely sense of hope moving forward. And I read it in one sitting. I gave it to my son. He read it in one sitting. I gave it to my husband. He read it in one sitting. It's a beautiful book, and the writing is so unusual. I want to say it's a 4-sentence poem that just travels and travels across these beautifully illustrated pages. And I highly recommend it. Okay. What have we missed? Oh, All American Boys. So this is the one I want to recommend for seniors. I want to recommend All American Boys and For Everyone for seniors. All American Boys is a work of fiction, and it's written by 2 authors, Brendan Keeley and Jason Reynolds. And they worked together so that they could kind of create these 2 characters. The book is told in 2 perspectives, 2 teenage boys. One is black and one is white. And they've come from, obviously different families, different experiences, and their stories get interwoven. And it deals with police violence. It deals with stereotypes and systemic racism in such a complex, such an insightful way, while also, really developing interesting characters, making you want to read. It doesn't feel like, sort of a forced chance to talk about important issues today or something like that. It's like a really compelling story about these 2 boys and their lives and their families and the things that happen. And I think it's just a fantastic book for an American lit class, or really for any class, but with older kids, I think. Then For Everyone is Jason Reynolds' long poem. This is such a perfect one for a senior gift. If you have a senior right now graduating that has been like outstanding in the English program and you just wanted to get them a little present, For Everyone would be a great choice. It's this very inspiring poem about kind of doing what you love in the world, being who you are. There's a video version of it online that Jason Reynolds created that would be great too to show in class. Okay, and then I almost forgot, I wanted to quickly touch on this short little story that Jason Reynolds wrote called The Ingredients. This short story is such fun. It's, I think, 4 boys walking home from the pool in the summer, and they're talking about what they would put on their sandwiches, like what amazing fantasy sandwiches they want to eat when they get home. And they go on and on and on, imagining these epic snacks. And then when they get home, they have what's there in the cupboard, and it's just like bowls of cereal. So it's a fun, just joyful, rollicking sort of story, and funny too. It's a great addition for a short story unit. Okay, so this is kind of a longer episode than usual because I really couldn't choose a favorite Jason Reynolds book. You should check out his website. It shows pictures of all of his books. It's a very sparse website in some ways, but I like it. It's unusual. And it also showcases some new things that he has going on. He's done a podcast with his mom, a 4-episode podcast, and I just found out about it today, so I haven't had a chance to dive in. And there's also a new short documentary about him linked up there. And again, just discovered those today when I was looking at his website for the first time in a little while. So I'm excited to explore those things. All right, my friend, I highly recommend you consider Jason Reynolds' books for your library, for your book clubs, for your first chapter Fridays, or your whole class texts. You could actually make a whole display across the top of your in-class reading library just out of his work, and I think it would fly off your shelves. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about all things Jason Reynolds. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative. Have you been wondering how to integrate a graphic novel into your curriculum? Maybe you want to try one as a whole class text, or maybe launch some book clubs? Oh, good. I'm now opening the doors to my free summer workshop, Camp Creative. Over the course of 1 week, I'll give you everything you need to banish your anxiety over getting started or going deeper with graphic novels. Get ready to see your students thrive with this accessible genre. Each day, you'll build your creative confidence and your graphic novel unit. Just as in Camp Creative's past, each day's training, packed with resources and tips, will arrive in your inbox, ready for you to explore when you have time. Get ready to scratch, figure out that whole graphic novel thing off your long-term to-do list, because you're about to get everything you need for success and a fun community to dive in by your side. You'll find the link to sign up in the show notes today. I can't wait to work with you inside this free summer session.